Hello everyone, this is Chara and welcome to the 5.3 tier list. We're going to be starting out with sub-weapons. Just keep in mind this is for splat zones only, and everything at about the same tier is around the same ranked position. I'm not ordering the tiers, that would take forever. So yeah, let's get this thing started. Alright, C tier. So first up we have Sprinkler. Sprinkler used to be one of the best swap weapons in this game with amazing paint output and consistent paint output. However, Nintendo's toned it down by so much that it basically paints the same amount as a splat bomb at max, and then paints a ridiculously negligible amount later. So at this point, all it really has is just how long it can paint just over time, or else splat bomb is even just better at painting than it is. However, again, because that amount is just so small and Sprinkler isn't a large commitment to take down, it's just very easy to ignore and not pay much attention to, which just puts it in a really bad spot right now in terms of being overall useful. Some situations it can be still nice, like maybe to help paint zone, but the effectiveness it has is just drastically lower compared to other sub-weapons. Point sensor is of course going to be lower in a competitive setting compared to solo queue. Because of callouts and communication, something like knowing where people are is a lot easier. Now, locating people obviously still has its benefits. It's a bit more specific and can last a while. However, compared to the effectiveness of other subs, it's once again very underwhelming. And just because communication is something that gets better the higher you go, the less the location is as needed. Again, still useful against some specific weapons or some situations, but compared to the value other sub-weapons can get in forcing people away from certain positions, it's just way less impressive. Lastly, you have Toxic Mist. Toxic Mist was a sub that I felt like the devs were just way too afraid to buff, because Disruptor, the sub this thing is based off of in the first game, was the best sub-weapon in Splatoon 1. Now the problem with Toxic Mist is that it's just way too easy to avoid or get out of the way. There's not really much of a penalty for it, like you can swim out of it very fast because the radius isn't that large. So outside of specific situations where you need to be in the mist, or if you have to make a jump since it lowers your jump height, it's just not really that useful. If it had a lingering effect, I could see it having a lot more use, but as of right now, it's just really hard to have a lasting effect from it, and very easy to avoid and get out of the way. Next up, with a bit of a step up in quality, we have Curling Bomb. Curling Bomb is not really that much of a bomb. The explosion radius is incredibly tiny to the fact that you almost never died to an uncharged Curling Bomb. It does have an explosion if you hold the button down, but it takes so long to throw and it goes almost nowhere on top of being slow that it's very situational to even use that one. Overall, curling is just, okay, it's a trail you have to pay attention to because they might be following it, but Fizzy can do that and so much more, so it's really hard to give Curling Bomb much credit. It's still something you have to pay attention to, but again, just not that much value. Next up is Splash Wall. You're going to be seeing a pattern with all three of these non-lethal bomb sub-weapons, which is that when you have map control, they're fairly useful, or in some situations like Splash Walls on flat ground, but offensively it can be really tricky, just because it doesn't provide as much consistent pressure when you don't have map control. A wall isn't going to really do anything if you don't have to push the person using the wall. Also, because wall deploys way slower on slopes, 15 frames slower, it makes it much more situational and much easier to exploit on certain map modes. Still useful in the right situations and the right weapons, but in a lot of cases it's not really the best thing. The last thing to note is it also gets hard countered by bombs, especially with Object Shredder, and bombs are just really good right now, so you're just going to have to be dealing with a lot of suctions and splat bombs that will be breaking your wall fast and have less of a cooldown than the wall has. Next up is Ink Mine. Ink Mine is kind of useful in zones. The ability to have like a controlled explosion that can help paint the zone, do chip damage, and even locate people, even if it's only for a little bit of time, is nice. But again, it's a very similar thing to where if you don't have to push where the mine is, it's not really going to do a lot. So when you don't have zone, it's pretty situational, because obviously when you're locked out, they can just play in the zone and you have to come to them at some point. It's still pretty useful for some tip damage situations, but again, very situational. The location time is also worth noting as being really short, so it doesn't even serve that much of a location effect. Lastly is Beacons. Beacons were really good with a more aggressive meta, since running quick respawn and being able to get faster jumps in is a nice combination. But since the meta is a lot survivability and special based right now, it's just not really that useful. There's definitely some maps like Moray where being able to get in like that is better, but in a lot of situations it's not the most useful thing, just a bit of a slight bonus. Now, another thing to note is that a lot of the weapons with Beacon are short-range weapons, which need a bomb even more than the long-range ones. The only really good Beacon weapon we've had has been Ballpoint, which has been nerfed over time, being a solid weapon still. But it's important to note that Beacon could potentially be higher if it were on better weapons, but it's important to note that there's really only one optimal Beacon weapon in the game right now. The other thing Beacon has is it can locate people who get slightly close to it on the map, which is a nice little bit of a recon effect. Overall, it can be really useful in some situations, but again, like with mine and with Wall, when you don't have map control, most of its usefulness goes away, if not completely. Lastly, in the lower half of the list, I guess, we have the A tier bombs, which is where things start to jump a lot higher in quality. Autobomb and Torpedo are very similar to each other. You throw it, the bomb moves towards you, and then it explodes. Torpedo is a little different because while it's not lethal, it's a bit faster, doesn't use less of your ink, but has less whiting frames, the area before you can recover ink, and it can be shot down. Autobomb is a lot slower and has a small lethal bomb radius, but not as bad as Curling Bomb. Both of these have their own situations. They're primarily good against slower weapons or sharking weapons, since sharking weapons get revealed, and slower weapons have a hard time moving out of the way. The bigger weakness is just faster weapons that can ignore it pretty well, especially Torpedo, since weapons with a high fire rate can shoot it down without paying much attention. Torpedo also has a secondary kind of throw where you roll it along the ground, which can be very useful for things like bubble blower popping or rapid blaster shots, where it basically acts as a mini burst bomb, doing 60 damage with a direct and 35 with an indirect. So that's something to note. I think Torpedo has the potential to be higher, but both of these sub-weapons are just good. They put a good amount of pressure, not a lot of pressure, but still a good bit, and shut down some weapons pretty hard. Just your average, really good bombs. Next up is Burst Bomb. Burst Bomb is pretty much just reliable tick damage. It's not as good at walling out as Splat and Suction, because those two bombs last longer and are lethal, but you can obviously throw more Burst Bombs and pressure more frequently for consistent tick damage. The other benefit has is just combo potential with a main weapon. This is especially relevant for things like Carbon and Tri-Slosher, and even other weapons like Grim, basically giving you ability to do damage at a longer distance that can combo with your main weapon. Burst Bombs are really useful in that regard, and there's not really another sub-weapon that can do as consistent tick damage like that. I still think the lethal bombs are better, which I'll get to in a bit, but definitely a lot of potential in the right hands in terms of being able to be used with certain weapons. Overall, still a really nice tick damage tool that's always somewhat useful. Next up in the S tier is Splat and Suction. These bombs are about equal. Splat Bomb has a little bit smaller explosion, but blows up a little bit faster, while Suction is a little bit longer and can stick to walls. Which is not even a downside, having a longer detonation time can stall out areas more. Both of these bombs are really great. They can do damage, they can wall out areas, they can pressure. They do just about everything. They're your standard bombs. I'm sure you know about them at this point. I think they're overall just very useful for pressure and poking, and are overall just really common. Need to be able to poke an area, need to be able to clear something, whatever the hell you need to do. These bombs can probably do it, and are just overall really good neutral tools. They're especially really good on supportive weapons like Junior and NZAP, that can afford to throw a lot of them and put a lot of pressure out on the map. And lastly is Fizzy Bomb. When I see lists listing sub-weapons, I always see Fizzy Bomb way lower than it should be, and I just question, why? This sub-weapon is probably the most broken sub-weapon in Splatoon history, and it can do everything. It has 3 explosions, which can both kill, because the 3 explosions can kill if you hit all 3 of them, and they do reliable tick damage, doing more indirect damage than Splat and Suction Bomb. They have the highest paint output out of any of the bombs. They go a little bit further than normal bombs, like Torpedo does. You can throw them fast to do reliable tick damage, and you can use it to have a paint trail to swim into. They use less ink than Splat and Suction Bomb. They don't have too much whiting frames, and you can run a double bomb kit fairly easily as well. Fizzy Bombs just literally can do everything. Oh, and I forgot. They also have one of the highest damage outputs, being really good for breaking Brella shields, Rainmaker shield, ballers, you name it. Overall, this subweapon really can do everything. I think the reason most people don't realize it is because it's either on a weak main weapon or it's with Ken's machine that has Splashdown, a weak special weapon. So, yeah, that's my list. I think the normal bombs are definitely a step above the non-lethals, and I would really love to see Nintendo make a step to make the non-lethals just a little bit better in just smaller regards, like having Mist have a lasting effect or something like that. Because I think bombs are just objectively more useful, and especially when you don't have map control, they're a huge asset to a lot of weapons kits. But let me know what you guys think. Thank you for watching.